very, very looking forward to this discussion of yours. If I can just say, you can keep your video on if you're comfortable, but please can I ask everyone to just put their microphones for now on mute. Shukri and Mark will handle the questions and you can post them in the chat box as we go along. We will read them there and we will answer them as we go along. You can also raise your hands in the question or give Shukri a hand clap. There is also a facility. I'm sure many of you have been on the webinars with us before. Just while we wait for Mark to notice the USB programs, if anybody wants any programs information, you are very welcome to go onto our website or to contact Charmaine. If there's anybody in the West East Africa, Mauritius area, you can contact Dr. Mariki van der Merwe. Contact details, I will post all of this also in the chat box where you can contact us. And for any of our corporate executive development programs, you can also look at the USB executive development website and find more there. Mark is just saying he's struggling to connect, but that is fine. Shukri, maybe we can just start the discussion so long while we wait for Mark. So just in the meantime, facilitator for the evening is Mark Phillips. Our discussion will be around about 40 to 45 minutes in total, just so for your planning, including our questions and discussion. So this specific webinar forms part of a series of the USB Alumni Association, and each of these webinars tackle different topics very relevant now in our current times, the challenges that we face at the moment. And I think tonight's topic around the entrepreneurial spirit is really, really applicable, especially what's been on the news during the last couple of weeks in terms of the situation in South Africa and what do we need to, what is the game changer for us to go forward. So our facilitator here for the evening then is Mark Phillips, who is the chairman of the Western Cape Alumni Association. So each of these webinars are facilitated and hosted by different chapters, of which we have 14. So each of them hosts different topics of interest, especially also in our Africa regions, which is upcoming in August. Mark is a Master's Futures alum, and he is the portfolio manager and strategist at Sanlam Investments. Shukri's detail is on the screen, his website. We invite you to visit his website. He's well known in his field, an expert on this topic. And I think without wasting more time, I'm not sure if Mark has been able to link up with us yet.
I've just messaged him. He said I should proceed, and then perhaps he can do a little bit of an intro or question and answer session. So I'm happy to kick off.
Absolutely. All right. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'll hand over to Shukri after his moment there, and then we can have a discussion. Please post your questions in the chat box, and we will raise that to Shukri. Do you prefer the questions towards the end or
so what I'll do is I promise to make it as fun and entertaining as possible, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a couple of key concepts for the first 15 minutes or so, and then it's always fun to make it more discursive. So as things go along, please make notes, jot them down, and then start popping them into the chat box, and then we can try and make them as interactive as possible.
I will check the chat box, and you can just give me an indication when I can read some questions to you.
Perfect. All right. So can I ask one question? Is someone going to record it? Can someone hit record, or is that?
Yes, it is already recorded.
Perfect. All right. All right. So good evening. Thank you so much for the opportunity. and I hope you're all keeping warm. I am in fact a Cape Townian, but I live in Johannesburg now, so I know you have a vast array of students from all over the world, and I'm very pleased that you are going to spend a little bit of time this evening to kind of talk through what I think is an important discussion this evening. So, you know, I am an entrepreneur, an investor, a film producer. I am an advisor to many sort of listed companies and things. And so tonight I bring sort of an entrepreneurial framing of the discussion, as well as sort of some of the leadership perspectives that need to be taken into account, depending on where you may be in the kind of value chain of our economy. So just a quick reminder to please put yourself on mute. I hear a few dogs in the background. So, so we'll start. All right, so just by way of introduction. So, you know, the topic, entrepreneurial spirit in disruptive times. So I think what's important is if we unpack those two terms independent of each other a little bit, right? And so we say entrepreneurial spirit, which is something that we should probably, and I would argue, have all the time. And then what I would also argue is that we are perhaps in a very heightened sense of disruption at the moment, but that we are in fact always in disruptive times as well. And so this conversation is as pertinent now as it would be at any other time. And so, you know, when we think about disruption, I'm going to kind of make this a little bit of a systems thinking lesson a little bit, right? I think from a leadership perspective, my meta narrative about disruption is the fact that we are in fact in a complex system. And that things are therefore ever emerging, you know, and things are sort of always changing, and that in fact stability is an illusion, and the fact that, you know, we happen to be in a heightened sense of a COVID-19 means that we are you know, open to this conversation, but in fact we're always in complex disruptive times. And then second of all, I think very carefully we've called it entrepreneurial spirit rather than entrepreneurship, because I think that what is most important is to be thinking about being enterprising, contributing to an entrepreneurial culture, contributing to an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And the fact that we all have a role to play, not necessarily by being entrepreneurs, but being entrepreneurially minded in the way that we go about the decisions that we make. And so, as was rightfully sort of you know, discussed in the introduction, we are in South Africa and the world in unprecedented times. We have just heard that we have, if you use the expanded definition, 10 million people without jobs in South Africa. We have an unemployment rate of 30%. And I think that it therefore goes, you know, it follows to say, well, what is our level of entrepreneurship in South Africa? And in fact, it's one of the lowest entrepreneurship rates in the world. And something that I often try to articulate to people is, in South Africa, the side that we have Switzerland and Bangladesh in one country. And the fact that we have, you know, we make decisions for the Swiss part of what South Africa is, and we exclude the Bangladesh part. And so something that, you know, which has also been in the news of late is the taxi industry, for example, right? So when we think about the taxi industry in South Africa, we think of them driving poorly, stopping, you know, without sort of, without giving you any sort of indication of stopping, and all the kind of negative aspects of what the taxi industry is. I would say, let's take a different view on that for a moment, right? The taxi industry in South Africa is the largest carrier of people in South Africa. And here is the big thing that I want the everyday person to try and understand, is that the taxi industry in South Africa is owned by the big four banks in South Africa. Despite the fact that there's this perception of an entrepreneurial spirit that flows through being a taxi operator needs to go to a bank that charges you an interest rate And so when you see these taxis on the road, you need to think that the big four banks are in fact owning these taxis on the road, despite the kind of developmental financing structures that government has tried to put in place. But what role do the big banks play in developing entrepreneurship, and do they have an entrepreneurial spirit in the way that they try to mete out their products and services? And I think, again, we take for granted. We would be happy to sit in a restaurant and have breakfast one morning and say, I would like my eggs like this, and someone brings it to you. And we don't think that someone who has traveled most likely in a taxi to get to that point to be able to make you that breakfast in that restaurant. And what role do big banks play to make sure that the taxi industry can actually get ahead and make money in that regard? The other thing that I think we don't often think about is that, for example, I'm based in Johannesburg. If you come out of a Gautrain, or I'm in my office at the moment, you walk outside and there are no informal traders on the side of the road. And if you go to a place like, I don't know, Istanbul, or you go to a place like Nairobi, Kenya, where the entrepreneurship rate is closer to about 6 or 7%. The unemployment rate is closer to 6 or 7%. We try to legislate and pass bylaws that actually stop people from having an entrepreneurial spirit in what they do. Just today, on my way to work, there were about 10 Metro police officers stopping an illegal trader on the side of the road trying to sell food to workers. And I stopped and I asked them, what's going on? And they said, oh, this lady doesn't have a permit to sell her fed cook on the side of the road. And so what we realize is that the whole system is rigged against having an entrepreneurial spirit and going towards, moving towards trying to drive a level of entrepreneurship in what we do. And so we have the structural inequality that we know, that is whether you're a liberal capitalist, or whether you don't have to be a capitalist, you don't have to be a socialist to realize that the structural economy globally is not working for us. And the fact that a CEO of a bank in South Africa can earn up to 140,000 Rand a day, and a worker who perhaps works in the same business, that's their annual income, over a 2 or 3 year period. And so what are we doing to be able to change the structural problems that we have within South Africa and indeed the world? Because I realize that there's an audience beyond South Africa that are perhaps even on this call today. And so what I want to put to you tonight is, if we've accepted COVID-19 as an emergency, we've accepted that as a result of this emergency, there are things that we have to do and that we can't do. And we've changed our behavior and we've accepted it. And what I want to put to you is to say, what if we are the frog in the pot and the water's rising? If up until this point, you haven't indeed lost your job, if up until this point, you haven't been put on short time, if up until this point, you have not thought about what else you could be doing with your power, influence, and time to drive to a more entrepreneurial system for the whole system and for yourself, I would argue that you are in a false sense of stability, that you have an illusion of control and you just can't see it. And so if you forget everything I said tonight, I would say that most South Africans did not have 3 years savings, did not have 3 months savings, did not have 3 weeks savings. In fact, if your salary didn't hit your bank account on the 25th or 26th of the month, could you survive 3 days? And that's the question I would argue, is that building in the ability to be entrepreneurially minded and have an entrepreneurial spirit goes down not only to the level of government and public policy, but actually should be the level of analysis should be the level of the firm and the level of the individual within society. In the news at the moment, I think for those of you that perhaps watched Minister Mbowene's budget yesterday, we would have seen that we're speaking about zero-based budgeting, right? Which is normally synonymous with fiscal planning and public finance. And yet, I think if you have not, let me give you a quick definition of zero-based budgeting, right? For those of you who perhaps haven't sort of followed it as closely. So typical budgeting is that you have a budget certainly at public finance level, and you look at last year's budget and you say, all right, let me add 5%, 6%, 10% onto that budget. And it's normally kind of linked to inflation, and you kind of just keep plodding along year after year. And what zero-based budgeting is that at some point, you have to actually put a marker in the ground, maybe every 5, 6, 7 years, because I think some of the planning needs to span, you can't do it every year because some of those plans need to move beyond that. But every 5 years or so, you have to put a marker in the ground and say, I'm going to start again. I'm actually going to do my budget from scratch, from zero. And so if you've never done this within your own personal finances, now is the time to do this. Now is the time to disrupt yourself. Now is the time to re-strategize. Now is the time, as I would say, to reimagine. So in public finance, we say rebasing. We need to reimagine, and you need to remind yourself to reimagine and rebase your own personal budget in 5 years to come. And so ask yourself, was my budget built on a previous strategy for which my lifestyle, was needed at that time? Do I need this car? Do we need 2 cars? Do I need these, levels of subscriptions or other things that come off your personal budgets? How do you build up resilience to be able to have the buffers to be able to move forward as an individual? And certainly if you're an entrepreneur within your business, to reimagine and redo your budget. Never has there been a better time for you to sit down and redo your budget to be able to be more entrepreneurially minded, have more of an entrepreneurial spirit within these disruptive times. And so I would again say that this is not only, I think, linked to being able to survive in disruptive times, in times in which there's currency fluctuations, in times in which there's low economic growth, in times where, we have all of these divergent factors coming in together. I would actually argue that being able to embrace a level of entrepreneurial spirit within your own life or within your own firm, being able to embrace the disruption. And I would say that you need to embrace the disruption, because we cannot plan and hope and want for stability, because things are constantly moving. And so I would argue that there's actually a greater level of happiness and self-actualization that can come from for yourself as an individual, as you move towards what your own kind of values are. And that's the essence of entrepreneurial spirit. And the fact that if you embrace the system, as that the system is not disruptive today because of COVID-19, it's in fact always disruptive. We just have had the opportunity to have a lens on it that we've never had before. And so there's definitely an impetus to do more. You have to ask yourself, how am I hustling to be able to use my privilege if I do in fact have a salary slip? How am I creating and increasing the rate of entrepreneurship in South Africa? How am I reimagining my life? How am I reimagining my business? How am I reimagining my role within teams? How am I contributing to an entrepreneurial ecosystem? Am I embracing instability? Am I embracing the fact that I need to not be lulled into a full sense of security? And ask yourself, is this the best thing that could have happened to me and to my business? Because we have an opportunity to reset. We have an opportunity to be able to build up the resilience to be able to kind of glide through these rough waters of uncertainty going forward. And so it's something that I'm quite passionate on, and again, I'm mindful of the fact that people come to this topic for a number of different vantage points. What role can you play in a corporate? What role can you play if you're an entrepreneur? What role can you play if you're a consultant? What should you do if you are in fact, at this point, sort of sitting on the outskirts of the formal economy? And so at this forum, I speak to, and I speak at many business schools around the world. The solutions are going to come from here. And I would say that leadership drives strategy, and strategy drives structural changes. And so we have to look inwards tonight and say that in a topic, whatever you thought we were going to get out of the entrepreneurial spirit in disruptive times, this is a call to action to say that we need to embrace that spirit, and we need to embrace the fact that disruption is not a COVID-19 phenomenon, but actually something that's going to be with us and has always been with us all along. So I have more to say, but what I would prefer to do is to respond to some of the questions and then perhaps unpack some more things as we go down the line. But as a start, I wanted to frame the conversation with that in mind.
Thank you, Shukri. That was a really, really excellent context for discussion. I have some questions here that I received. Maybe I can kick off with the first question. And then I would like anybody else to raise your hand and unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question. The first one here is, how do emerging talent and new graduates integrate into established supply chains or industries that are ripe for disruption? Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I see our facilitator, Mark Phillips, has arrived. Mark, I don't know if you want to. You've come in. You've come in at a good time because I've finished my my first monologue part. So I know that Mark wanted to ask 2 questions first, maybe, and so maybe Mark, I'm going to let you dive in and just kind of ask those 2 questions, and then I'll dive into Christelle's question around emerging talent within established supply chain.
Sure.
Okay, so I mean, apologies for me being late. I think we had some connectivity issues on my side. So yeah, apologies about that. And thanks, Shukri, again for your insights. I know the meeting is being recorded, so I mean, I can probably just have a look at that a little bit later. But I think, yeah, I mean, in context, I mean, there's a lot on the go. I think entrepreneurship becomes quite important given sort of, the COVID-19 pandemic that we've seen. But I think, largely just speaking also like joblessness in South Africa, over 30% becomes quite an issue. And then, you've got another sort of steamroll trend, that being the 4th industrial revolution that also is coming at us. So I think, finding, the right jobs and skills that sort of match the context is quite important. So with that said and done, I think, what does talent really want sort of in South Africa, call it over the next 5 to 10 years? And then, what is the mantra that is needed to almost embed this philosophy of taking entrepreneurship important? So, I mean, I think that's almost one question, Shukri. And I think then maybe the second one, just to kick it off, is what is the potential of development of entrepreneurship as almost a digital marketplace and a network in South Africa too, just given the role of technology?
Yeah. So thank you so much. With respect to talent and entrepreneurship, more holistically speaking, I want to say this unequivocally. Entrepreneurship is hard. And Muhammad Yunus, the author of Banker to the Poor, described having a job as being soaked in warm water in which all your hard edges fall off you. And so there's a level of pain and discomfort that people have to be willing to go to. And again, is this particular moment in history the push that you needed to put yourself through that level of pain and discomfort? I think holistically speaking, from an entrepreneurship perspective, if you look at other countries around the world that have kind of succeeded in building a far higher rate of entrepreneurship, and in fact started to address problems of economic growth and joblessness, is my key word here would be alignment. Alignment in policy, alignment in skills development, alignment in strategy, and then alignment in, again, the spirit in which we go out and do that. So we're not having police officers stopping traders on the side of the road from selling Vetkoek more than going out and actually stopping people from committing crime. That we have, all of us, we have alignment towards the fact that we need to be having an entrepreneurial spirit, an enterprising spirit in everything that we do. So that's the first thing. Then with respect to digitization, I think that the only way that we are going to come through and overcome our unemployment problems and our low growth problems is being able to embrace the opportunities of the fourth industrial revolution and the gig economy. We have to rapidly and at scale make sure that the digital inequality that exists, that is now being exacerbated, and I think we're going to be left behind with this digital divide, that we have to try and find ways to be able to kind of close that gap and bring more people onto the journey. And again, I think this is where public-private partnerships are really important. And if you find yourself like Mark at a big firm, you've got to be saying, how can I leverage the stability of a big firm to embrace the agility of an entrepreneurial business that can ultimately foster the right ecosystem, and rather than like this monolithic approach to how to building a business. And so I think part of it is to say we have to think about business model innovation. We have to be thinking about moving away from monolithic business models into linked ecosystems of autonomous agents. And all of those having the kind of freedom and autonomy to have the level of entrepreneurial spirit required to succeed. So should I move on to Christelle to the first question that you posed? I think you're muted.
Yeah,
so I'll just read.
Shukri, yeah, these relate very much to what Mark has posted. I've received that, so I'm not sure, Mark, if there's anything else on these questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Shukri, with that question that Christelle was going to ask, I think, there is, I suppose, this gap that exists. And I think, even just with the recent budget that sort of got tabled sort of around sort of COVID, I think there is this big need, for, call it socio-economic, but as well as socio-environmental aspects that almost need to take off, be it, what they label infrastructure. But I think, there's a lot of money that is going to be driven into the space. And I think, from the other side, really, finding entrepreneurs almost to embed themselves or integrate themselves into supply chains. How do you see this playing out, given your experience? And then I think there's another question that maybe you can almost tie it into it. But I mean, what is, call it the characteristics or traits that you need personally to almost make this happen?
Yeah, so let me quickly comment a little bit on the supply chain thing. I think what we have to realize is that, whether you are, no matter what store you perhaps open in a physical space, in a brick and mortar space, that platforms like Amazon become your competitor overnight. And the fact that if they choose to play in your particular space, they can disrupt your particular supply chain. And so again, I think that what we have to be sort of predicting on the curve is at which point does Amazon's strength become a disadvantage, and where are those opportunities within different supply chains for me to kind of get stuck in and provide things at a more convenient or at a lower price or with a particular kind of competitive advantage. And so I think there are opportunities now, again, where people are for the first time engaging with doing things differently. And so, if you can find a compelling way to be able to convince businesses that this is perhaps part of the new way of doing business or part of a new way of, moving forward, in which it'll add more value to them, in whether that's cost or otherwise, now would be the time for graduates to be thinking about how they can contribute to supply chains. And I think that we are ripe for disruption in South Africa in that regard. I've spoken a little bit about the kind of developing of entrepreneurs and the fact that I think for me more than anything is alignment. I think the question about what are the top 5 skills that entrepreneurs need, and again, I get asked this all the time, so I should have this answer like lock and loaded. But I'll go through, I can think of 4, and maybe a 5th one will come to me, right? So the first one is resilience. Like I've said, I think the ability to be able to withstand, and weather the storm. I would say there's a little bit of pain and a point to prove that I think entrepreneurs need to have as well. If you have nothing to prove or nothing that you want to contribute to the world, or you have no major cause to go out and try and fight for, it's going to be very hard to justify how hard it is to be able to be out there. And that's why you find that most entrepreneurs are in fact the misfits, the people that don't quite fit into getting, fitting squarely into the box. And so they kind of have a point to prove, to say that I can live a quality of life that's different. I can, I can disrupt the value chain. I can do that. I want this for my legacy. I think that what's vitally important is a sense of self, and a sense of, in a world where you can Google everything, the only thing that's important is understanding yourself. And again, I think we come through a schooling system, for example, that teaches people parrot style. We get people who have 7 A's in matric, and they come out and they're like deeply uneducated people that know nothing about the rest of the world, and they know nothing about themselves, but they found a way to be able to win in that regard and pass exams at an 80-90% aggregate. And so are we kind of teaching ourselves about ourselves? Are we able to kind of, have that ability to self-examine? And so I don't know how many, I've lost track of my numbers now, but those are some of the kind of key aspects that I think, people need to be very conscious of. Christelle.
You're on mute.
Just another question, Shukri. I think there's a lot of fear currently out there. I've also spoken to some entrepreneurs who've just started a venture sort of in the beginning of this year, January to March, and then COVID happened. Many of them are trying still to hold out in the hope that things will turn around. But I think there is a huge need for what do entrepreneurs do to overcome this fear now? How long should I hold out? I've invested maybe years in planning this venture. I've just started, and now I've been hit by the most challenging time possible. And then new entrepreneurs who haven't started yet, who were contemplating, how do they overcome that fear? What type of support is out there? What can they look forward to?
So, again, and we can't do a quick poll. If we were sitting face to face, we could probably do a quick hand raise to say who has a business, who's ever registered a business, who's currently in a business. And my guess in a South African audience is that the numbers are very low. You're looking at like 10 to 20% of a class or a particular audience that is involved in an entrepreneurial venture in some way, shape, or form. And one of the traits that I could say in the previous question would be risk appetite as well. Like, do you have the appetite for risk? Like, did you get off on that? Is something that, is that something that you enjoy? Because I think if you are an entrepreneur who started a business in the last 3 months, it is the time to fuss bait. It's the time to realize that maybe this, as I've said earlier, the greater risk is to not push through on this. The greater risk is to, as the frog, jump back into the hot water and think that it's actually comfortable back in that pot. In a country with 10 million people in the expanded definition looking for jobs, why would you jump back into the pot and remove from yourself that sense of autonomy and freedom to be able to learn the skills to be able to win? I think people need to draw a much longer timeline for themselves. I always tell people buy from you the 5th time you ask them, and that can take between 5 and 10 years. So one of the worst things that people do is that I go to Mark and I say, Mark, I'm selling these pens. Do you want to buy them today? And Mark goes, dude, I'm not in charge of the stationery budget, and you're like, oh, I'll never speak to Mark again. He doesn't support me. But you say, no problem, man. Like, it's all good. When you're ready, you call me. Next time you see Mark, you say, Mark, how are things going? I now sell pens and papers. You know what I mean? And you just keep him up to date with what's happening. At some point, Mark's sitting on a finance committee and he says, you know, I actually want to bring these guys in from an enterprise development perspective, because we can look at sort of driving perhaps diversity and a developmental approach to our particular supply chain in that regard. And that can happen in 2, 3, 4, 5 months or years. And again, I can tell you that having been in business for 14 years, there are people who I have spoken to 5, 6, 7 years ago, and they find you and they say, hey, you know the conversation we had 5 years ago? I'm ready to have it now. So find a way to build up the resilience to get through it. Make the sacrifice. Drive a smaller car. Share a car. It's a dream deferred, not a dream lost.
And then maybe if I can have sort of a follow-up sort of around that. But I mean, with that said and done, I mean, that's sort of, you know, real personal. As an individual, there's certain things that you need to overcome, you know, be it risk-taking or, you know, certain traits that you need to possess. But ultimately, I mean, I suppose the environment also matters, you know, that the government actually sort of puts out. So, I mean, over the next sort of 5 to 10 years, you know, what is key for, I suppose, government and business in terms of what do they need to set up for talent and enterprise to flourish? So really to almost get the future industrialists, you know, in big business. And then, you know, what about it in terms of alignment and collaboration almost needs to happen to actually unlock that?
Yeah, I think you're catching me certainly at a time where I'm particularly angry at some of the decisions that are being made by government, by the banks, by you know, kind of organizations and institutions that are ostensibly out there to help and create sort of like economic growth. Like, I feel like they've got it wrong over the last period. Even this government grant, you know, we stand up and we make announcements and hundreds of billions of rands get kind of put into, you know, kind of pots for people. And then I know of entrepreneurs and businesses who need it that can't access it because of, you know, kind of, you know, kind of different paperwork and the bureaucracy that comes with that. So I think, you know, what we do is we put like levels of bureaucracy onto things. And again, I think that if we think of it as a system, what we again have to ask ourselves is, what can we contribute to the system that moves it forward? How do we say that if we are leaders within our business, to say, if we don't disrupt ourselves now and bring in entrepreneurially minded and people with entrepreneurial spirit to change our value chain, to change our particular business model, to kind of create alignment for what we could look like in 3 to 5 years' time, I think it's going to be very, very hard. So, you know, government throws symposiums and we talk about it. And I think what's really sad is that, you know, there's so much that is kept in a very, very small circle. And I would hope and wish that we create an environment that is safe to fail. You know, in the US, you know, if you're an entrepreneur that's failed once or twice, that's great. Now I'm going to invest in you now. In South Africa, it's like you're blacklisted. You can't even buy a, you know, Toyota Corolla if you go ever again for 10 years. Like, we've got to change the definition of what failure is. Like, the greatest failure, the greatest fear is not to let entrepreneurs go out there and fail. We've got to fail fast. We've got to fail forward, and we've got to create an environment that allows people to fail in that regard. Again, I can tell you personal stories of myself in which we had to, you know, jump through hoops, and this will maybe one day come out in my book or something. And I mean, I'm not quite there to kind of, you know, put this out there, but the things that you have to do to try and get by is, again, this is what I speak about, risk appetite. Because if you try to kind of just do things by the book, you can't. You know, I'm gonna open a bank account. Okay, where's your VAT? Oh, in order to get a VAT number, you need to have an invoice. In order to get an invoice, you need to have a VAT number. You know, a basic thing like starting a business is really, really hard for people. Oh, you need 3 years trading. Okay, cool, but I just started my business to be able to sell Mark this pen. but you need 3 years trading. We need to know that you can sell this pen. So how do we align supply chain? How do we align procurement? How do we align budgets? How do we, create space for people to be able to fail? So I see the 2 other questions that have kind of popped up. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if I can almost tie it up. I mean, around that, I think, there is that saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. I think, what Renier is saying, it's almost, as an entrepreneur, he appreciates chaos, because I think chaos provides, opportunity to be innovative, to help solve problems and challenges. And then Devan is basically asking, looking for opportunities, what industries in a post-COVID world would you say actually brings about those opportunities for an entrepreneur to seize?
Yeah, so I agree with Renier. Entrepreneurs thrive on disruption. I think if things are super stable and everybody's happy with what's happening in the world, like what opportunities can there possibly be for you to kind of get into a little nook or cranny to be able to, drive your particular product or service. So the fact that you're in this state of chaos means that you need to be, you're agile enough to be able to kind of be surfing through these choppy waters at the moment. So I couldn't agree more. And that's again why some of those, aspects of like grit, resilience, risk appetite need to be very top of mind. And again, I would say to people who are involved in a corporate business to say, you've got to ask yourself, how am I contributing to be able to make it easier for people every single day? Or have I not contributed to a larger, and am I driving further inequality by not thinking about how I could perhaps even assist a small business? Can I consult to a small business as someone who's got lots of skills and I work in a particular corporate? Should I take and mentor 3 businesses and give them my thoughts and ideas? Should I rework their management accounts for them? Should I give them better data on their business? Should I share resources with them that they wouldn't be able to have? Should I be a sounding board? Should I be a kind of board of advisors? So those are the kind of things that entrepreneurs need. And I think that it can be very energizing for the people that are involved in those kind of things as well. And that's a really practical thing that anybody can do. A lot of entrepreneurs use the language, seek opportunities. What industries in a post-COVID-19 world would you say lies new opportunities to seize? So I think we've spoken about the 4th Industrial Revolution, the gig economy, the fact that I think there are opportunities for the fact that we are in a favorable time zone globally for the Middle East, Europe, and how can we use our level of digitization or improve our level of digitization to be able to contribute to those particular economies, and look at sort of new industries in that respect, whether it's media or digital or tech. And what I do want to say to people though as well is that I think people are in this state of panic and fear right now, okay? And what I want people to know is that we will not forever be people that are only putting petrol in our car and driving to the grocery store and buying food. At some point that's going to change, and we're going to be interested in music again, and we're going to be interested in arts, and we're going to be interested in sport. I would not scramble for essential services at this time. I've seen people pump money into making masks. I've seen people pump money into making hand sanitizers. And again, what I would argue is to say that perhaps in a strategic play that gives you the kind of cash flow to be able to start something else that seizes the minds and hearts of people, that can create a true market for yourself in whatever business you try to do. So make sure it's linked to a passion for yourself. Make sure it's linked to your sense of what you would want to go and do. And don't be dictated to by the particular structure of what's happening at the moment. So Faye asks about corporate entrepreneurship. I would love to spend more time on this and love to give you more models where this has worked. And again, maybe Mark, you and I need to kind of work on a corporate entrepreneurship project here.
Why not?
all too often, I think corporates see, corporate entrepreneurship as the enterprise development program. Okay, we've done that. We've kind of done our ED spend. But we have to be saying, how do we bring entrepreneurs into our businesses? How do we create true corporate entrepreneurship in which we start, cutting through company politics, cutting through bureaucracy, cutting through all the kind of admin blocks that stop us from behaving in a way that is, going to be able to allow us the agility to be able to compete in an entrepreneurial way. And then the other question is health and safety for organizations and automation of food production plants and online education, to mention only a few. So yeah, I agree. I think that I think health, definitely. I think we've learned things about, well, how could we contribute and plug into a governmental system that can contribute to greater data using, again, 4IR technology to understand and perhaps detect early, and perhaps we're going to move into a world of a George Orwell's 1984 Big Brother kind of thing, where we can check whether we are kind of what our temperature is ourselves, and where that level of kind of again autonomy happens. I think online education, again, I think as a USB, I have a wife who works at a business school as well. It's a question, what does that look like? I think the USB has always done really well at created the sort of like blended learning thing, right? Where you have an online experience and also an offline experience at the same time. And so I think there are opportunities. I really do think there are opportunities. And I think people need to, as I said, really work hard to extricate their thinking from the traditional I'm in a stable zone, and truly try and find an entrepreneurial spirit within themselves to disrupt themselves in these disruptive times.
Then maybe, just maybe last few questions, maybe before we end off, Shukri. I think, if I look at youth unemployment, I get quite concerned. I think to some extent we've potentially lost two generations of youth that will have issues actually, like finding work and the likes. But given sort of the fourth industrial revolution and automation and just potential new ways of work and new industries that open up, if you had to say something to a 16-year-old, what would you tell him? Especially if things are tough and it almost seems like he comes from a disadvantaged background. There's no hope ultimately. What would you say?
I would say something both to the 16-year-old and to the potential employer that he goes to, because I think it's difficult for different reasons on both sides, right? I think we're dealing with sort of like generational differences in terms of the way that people have been brought up. And you're right. I think we have a ticking time bomb of youth unemployment. We have all the ingredients of the Arab Spring in South Africa. In fact, it's far worse than the numbers are far worse than it was in the Arab countries during the Arab Spring, 7-8 years ago, whatever it was. And so what I would say to the young person is to say, you need to kind of cultivate within yourself some of those lifelong lessons that perhaps our parents have taught us of apprenticeship, of having some patience, kind of sitting it out, be willing to be an unpaid intern, be willing to add more value that you're getting paid for right now. Again, have a longer view of what that would look like. And then by the same token, I contributed and consulted to the President's Youth Entrepreneurship program that was launched 2 years ago when President Ramaphosa became the president. And it's really, really hard from a corporate perspective as well to integrate young people into that environment. And again, we can sit here all we want in the comfort of our own homes and offices and speak about that. But are you willing to, again, I use the word disrupt yourself, to say that what I'm contributing to is to have a 16-year or 18-year-old or 19-year-old with me right now and teaching them some of those basic things when it's uncomfortable for you to be able to need to do that, when it's actually pretty comfortable and you don't need to spend your time, teaching someone perhaps not even the kind of subject matter stuff that you think you may be teaching them, but rather some of the skills required to be able to survive in a work environment, because that's what you find yourself teaching young people in those environments. And so I think, again, we can't sit on the fence. We have to dive into having an entrepreneurial spirit. And part of that entrepreneurial spirit is empowering young people. Part of that entrepreneurial spirit is empowering small business. Part of that entrepreneurial spirit is re-looking at your own lifestyle and budget. Part of that entrepreneurial spirit is the conversations that you have in the boardroom, and the things that you lobby for within your particular place of work.
Okay. And then I think maybe just a question to sort of end off. So it's a question from Nazir. Just any advice for starting up a venture in a capital intensive industry such as manufacturing? Do funders, be it asset management, government schemes, etc., currently have appetite for investing during these uncertain times? So I mean, maybe Shukri, before you start there, I think capital goes where capital is efficient. So I think government and asset managers are willing to fund a lot of these ventures. But again, I think with the government, there comes quite a lot of, I suppose, paperwork and I suppose, what's the right word without being too technical, but just scorecard related, I suppose, compliance that you need to do to actually get a lot of these fundings. But I mean, from my understanding, from what I see, there is funding available to these things. But again, it's what you are doing and what you're trying to do. Yeah,
no, I think that's well articulated. I think, Nazir, I think what's important, and again, I'm kind of going back to some of the things I've said before, right, is I think that there have to be these key partnerships. So again, I'm an investor in all types of businesses. So I'm an entrepreneur in which I own a few businesses, then I invest in other business. And then I'm also a deal maker in which I raise capital for people. What is required is a clear thesis of what you're trying to achieve, a great team on board. Now, there's no way that if you've had no track record of running perhaps a manufacturing plant, that you are going to get through the intensive scorecard that Mark speaks about. It's going to be very hard. And again, there's an onus on government. There's an onus on big business to be able to say, how do we empower small industrialists? How do we empower people to sit on their board, to kind of give them the kind of level of stability required to be able to start businesses like that? How are we creating an environment in which we can actually build businesses that have the competitiveness to be able to compete with the supply chains that you could get globally and things like that. So there's a lot of money around the world. My having had some experience and being involved in deals like this at the moment is that you need to have the right people on board. And so the question is, can you even get to these people? Will these people have a conversation with you, let alone sit on your board, let alone be on your advisory board, let alone invest in your business? So there's a lot of capital in the world. There's enough capital. And I don't think South Africa at the moment is an efficient place to put your money if you're an investor, or Mark, and I think Mark deals with that on a daily basis. Nazir, we are seeing a lot of money flowing into food and beverage production in plants in Africa at the moment, subject to all what the speaker mentioned. Yeah, I mean,
Shukri, maybe just to end off, and I think for me, I work for quite a big business, and it's a corporate, but I think the formal economy, be it big business or how the formal economy has a role to play into integrating, call it future industrialists. I think, it's well in its way. Yes, it might not be the best, and there's a lot more that we can do. But I'm well aware that the informal sector is also quite a massive part of our economy. And I think if you just look at what's happened in recent times, that auntie that sits at the taxi rank that sells her food, she hasn't been able to work. The lady that sort of cuts people's hair, or the barber, all these things are entrepreneurial ventures, or the spaza shop, or I'm making that sort of almost real to the real economy, but that's informal by nature. At what point do we sort of see these spaces merge, or is it merged in your mind? And yeah.
So Mark, actually, before you came on, I actually mentioned it in terms of, in my start, is the fact that this even today coming into work, that I saw a trader being shut down by the Metro Police because she didn't have a permit for selling a vet cook on the side of the road. There has to be a shift in that. Like, how can that possibly be a priority right now? How can we make it easy for people to be able to be selling things on the side of the road? There's no way that our economy is going to absorb 10 million jobs. Like, there's just no way that we're going to absorb 10 million jobs. And we've got to be able to be creating an environment for the informal economy, as well as the formal economy. And you're right, there are things in place to kind of try to bridge that, to be able to try and develop, future industrialists and businesses going forward. But again, I think that what we're dealing with is an overall difficulty from a competitiveness perspective. So even people with capital are struggling to create viable businesses out of the resources and assets that they have at the moment. And so, again, for me, it's about allowing, there has to be some give. You've got to be able to make, there have to be some trade, kind of some sacrifices made.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I think that's it, eh?
How are we doing on time?
Yeah, it's 25 to. So, I mean, I don't want to keep you much longer. I think we can end it off there. I think it's ended off on a good note. I mean, yeah, apologies on my behalf. I mean, and I think, yeah, there was just issues. And thank you, Shukri. Thanks for making your time. Yeah, and thanks for, I mean, being a sort of beacon of light in the world. And I suppose just keep on shining. Yeah, thanks for making time to share some insights. And to everyone else that's joined, yeah, thanks for taking the time out to join us. And yeah, we hope to see you soon. And yeah, I think from my side, everyone just stay safe, stay warm, and I suppose stay healthy, eh?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark, for the opportunity, and everybody else. I think the technical issues aside, I think it was an important conversation. And again, if you're one of the people on this call, I think there's an impetus on you to try and perhaps go out. There's a call to action to change something, whether that's your own personal budget, whether it's the way you respond in your particular business. And again, small punt from me, follow me on social media, on Instagram and things like that, and just stay in touch. I think that's the quickest way to kind of stay in touch with me, because people are always like wanting to send like long emails and stuff. Just, I kind of, I enjoy kind of interacting with people on like LinkedIn, Instagram and stuff like that. So that's the easiest way to stay in touch with me as well. So thanks so much.
Yeah. And then we'll have the recording available as soon as possible. And I think it will be uploaded to the YouTube channel too. Yeah. So just if anyone else missed it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, guys. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.